All right, so name is Brian Howard.
Yes.
How old are you?
How old am I? I'm 65 years old.
Okay. And where you are from?
Well, originally I grew up in the Adirondacks, up in a little town called Bloomingdale, New York, outside of Center Lake. But most of my professional career has been in the greater capital region. I currently reside in Lansingburg, but I have lived in Brunswick, and before that I spent 10 years in Columbia County in Omai.
What town?
I lived for 10 years up in Omai.
Okay.
All right.
Gotcha. And what was your occupation?
I'm a career educator. I started as a middle school teacher in social studies, then went on to be a principal. Most of my principal years were spent in Chatham, New York as the high school principal. Went on to be the superintendent, 2 superintendencies before retiring. I retired from Queensbury in 2008. During that process, State Ed, after retirement, called me in to lead a team into Albany High School because they were chronically failing to make recommendations for changes. Then I was hired at Berlin Central Schools when they went through 3 superintendents in a row and needed to settle down. I spent 2 years in Troy after they went through some troubles trying to train and bring them around and prepare their next leader. They're now doing well, I might add.
Great. Speaking of education, where do you stand with the way the implementation of the Common Core has been?
I have either the fortunate experience or unfortunate experience of being the interim superintendent in Troy when they started bringing this process in. And it's unfortunate. I spent 40 years in education, and that is the worst job State Ed has ever done of bringing a program forward. They did not listen to the teachers, principals, superintendents, and parents. They didn't understand that if you want to make change, you have to do it slowly and gradually and make sure you have the support of everybody. I have a problem with their testing program, their end of the year 3-hour exams for children who are younger than 14 or 12, 13, 14 is inappropriate. It's not the best way of doing it. What you should do are periodic, what are known as formative tests. That you dipstick, take examples along the way. You also get immediate feedback so teachers know how to make adjustments and where their students are. The current system are massive exams that cause nothing but tension. You cannot have a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 10-year-old to sit for 3 continuous hours, and the amount of stress and pressures on them. And it's not an accurate reading. And to top it off, the State Ed doesn't give you the results until the beginning of the next school year, so you can't even use the information. We need to stop where we are and go back and do it right and take 5 years to do it.
Right. Now, if that process isn't what needs to be done, how can we get our children up to speed with kids in China, India, Japan?
Well, nobody's saying abandon standards, but when you're going to make changes that are that significant, you first have to build an understanding. You have to build the capacity of teachers to be able to make the adjustment. And anything that's large, anything you do well in life, you have to have time to practice it, and you have to have time to understand it, and then make adjustments as you're going along. I think even the business model says typically if you're going to make a significant change, it takes 5 years to do so. We're not saying don't use standards, let's not make some changes for improvements. We're saying if you're going to do it, let's do it the right way.
Why are you running?
Well, I'm running, and it really has to do with a couple of things. First of all, I was brought up to believe that you have an obligation to make things better for the next generation. And to be quite honest with you, they've been lost, the next generation. They're not a priority in Albany, and quite honestly, they're not a great priority in Washington either. I'm embarrassed as to what we have done in the shape of things and what we're trying to pass on to our next generation. My goal is to go and achieve 3 basic things in Albany. I want to show the next generation there's such a thing as an honest politician. There's such a thing as a person who can go there and get people with differences to work together. And quite honestly, I want the big money out because we're losing one person, one voice. I'm an ex-social studies teacher who used to tell students in the middle school in 7th grade that voting is important. You have a voice. But when you see the corruption that money is having on the process, that's in danger. We're losing it. And that's why I decided to run for office.
What set you? What are the differences between you and your opponent? Thank
well,
you.
there's a number. I mean, obviously she's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. She's under investigation by the FBI. I am not. But I think the big difference is I'm going to go back to the first time she ran for the New York State Senate. I don't believe that what I saw there was the worst example of toxic character assassination I have ever seen. Roy McDonald's a person who I had distinct differences with. But I happened to respect him, and when he disagreed, because I had to lobby him on behalf of school districts, he would call and explain why he did where he did. He'd go back and forth. I didn't know that I could respect and trust him. And when he showed political courage to do the right thing and take a stand for the Right to Marry Act, and I saw what he became a victim of, and Senator Marchionne's campaign did character assassination of a good person for doing the right thing. And that I found poisoning. It was made worse when the attacks were made on Robin Andrews. And currently there's a young woman up there who has been the whistleblower about this Tansky corruption. And the name calling, the harassment she's going through, just hasn't backed off, and she's been right all the way along. That type of toxic character assassination, that's one big difference. The second difference is when we sit around, what are our priorities? We have to start talking really about how to build an infrastructure. You can't talk about building an economic future without internet, addressing the 50 and 100-year-old systems of sewer and water, our roads, and many of the rural areas, particularly here in Columbia County and in eastern Rensselaer County and parts of Washington County. That's sort of the Erie Canal. That's how you open things up, is you have internet to conduct businesses. That's not even entering into the conversation. I think that's another big difference. And the other piece is she's a single issue Republican. She took and advocated against the right to marry. She's now taken, and her issue is the SAFE Act. I'd report she's been there 2 years since this was passed and has done nothing. And she's part of a majority, so I would say that she certainly has been ineffective. There's no record of her sitting down and trying to bridge differences with individuals. I think NYPIRG, and this is one I do have to double check, says that she's the least, has the lowest level of participation in the debates and conversations that are going on there. And she's willing to take endless amounts of money and uses that, and I have a problem with it. I'm going to end. The other difference is I actually, if I promise to show up for a debate, I'm there. So those are, I think, are some of the differences. And I'm not going for another long-term career. I want to make a little difference, make it better, and hand it to the next generation.
Here in Columbia County, you've mentioned how money can be an issue. We've had some issues with our CEDC and the IDA here, giving money to projects that have struggled or have not come to fruition. Is that something that...
Well, yes, I think, but by the way, not just in Columbia County. If you saw the report that was recently given by one of the newspapers, I think it was in Albany, it's widespread, but the worst abuses, least effective investments they're making are in the greater capital region, Columbia County and some others. And I don't think it's right to say, I'm going to give you a tax break and you are responsible for creating these jobs, but by the way, we aren't going to watch it, we're not going to hold you responsible, so don't worry about it. And then compare that to the Common Core when they want to hold teachers responsible for things they may have no control over, or any individual contractor who's doing a project, they're held responsible. So if you're going to spend money and you expect to get the results, and there are ways of monitoring and watching that. And then when the people say, oops, sorry, we didn't do it, and move across the border or out of state, there has to be some way of recovering that. And people have to be held responsible. It's just common sense, and everybody else in every other field is held responsible. So that needs to be restructured completely.
Where do you stand on the casino issue here in the Capitol region?
Well, let me put it this way. According to the Constitution, what they pass, it's a local decision, and I will respect a local decision. However, personally, I voted against it when it was a constitutional proposal. It is not something that I would support if it was coming into my area where we had to do it. I'd be speaking out against it. I have a problem. The market is saturated. I don't think anybody's proven their economic benefits. There are places closing in the region, and I'm not sure I like the idea of saying we're going to raise revenue by having one winner out of every 900, or out of every 10,000, but everybody else loses. That whole process, I really don't care for. I will respect the local decision.
Where do you stand on the SAFE Act?
On the SAFE Act, I need to go back and, first of all, I would not have voted for it. The sham of ramming it through so quickly without a discussion, that undermines the whole democratic process, and quite honestly undermines the credibility of a piece of legislation. And first of all, I want to make sure you understand, I grew up, I still have the original shotgun my father gave me, the original .22 that my uncle gave me, and I have a pistol permit to carry, and I own a pistol. I'm in favor of putting together a package to replace it that, number one, has some common sense measures, will be debated, and doesn't make hunters, target shooters, collectors feel like criminals, because quite honestly, some of them woke up the next day and they were breaking the law. And you know, there's some of those restrictions that are not respectful of long-term traditions of competitive shooting and people who go hunting. So I would like to work with others to write a substitute bill, and that the last sentence would be, and it would say, when this is passed, the previous, whatever the Senate and Assembly bill was, will then be null and void. I'd like to replace it. I'm not going to go in and say, let's get rid of it, because that takes away the leverage to get people to work together to come up with a common sense answer.
Would you raise the minimum wage?
Yes. It's very simple. Whenever you've been a high school principal and you watch individuals who actually are supporting their families, supplementing their incomes, and I've had single moms in a couple of the districts that actually were working 60 80 hours a day because they couldn't feed their families, they couldn't pay the rent without doing that. And I think that it's reasonable to say that every individual is entitled, as long as they work hard, to a wage that allows them to participate in the economy by buying groceries, clothing, pay their rent, and have a safe place to live. That makes common sense to me. And I would point out, history says that it stimulates the economy because they spend the money.
Another issue with minimum wage jobs is that many times people who work them work different hours every week. And there has been some talk of maybe changing that and mandating that they work the same hours every week.
Okay. Well, you know, it would make sense if it fits. Now, I'm not going to tell you I know every single business well enough to say that should just be right across the board. But to me, it would make sense. If you want people to have a life where they, first of all, that much disruption causes stress and is not good for health. It makes it more difficult to get things done. Especially if you're a student in school and you have to plan to do this, how you get your homework done, where you're going to do those things. But once again, there are many single moms who have these jobs. That's probably the largest group. It would be nice if they could plan their lives, be able to work on it. So in most circumstances, I would say, yes, I'd like to see that done. But I'm not going to say the 100% all-inclusive, because somebody might come and say, well, this is a little bit different. What do you think about that? We'd have to listen to that.
Where do you stand on the marijuana issue with it? The changes in the laws recently.
Well, listen, I'm a big supporter of the Compassionate Care Act, and I was sitting there applauding when the Commissioner of Health asked for the exemption so that we can import marijuana and begin treating individuals quickly. There are, I actually got a phone call from an individual in Skodak whose child, because of the medical condition, was going to have to wait 2 years before she could get the treatment, and this would be very beneficial to her. So what she wanted to see happen was that we would immediately get an exemption so that it could be imported, because the way this law is written, nobody's going to benefit for a minimum of 18 months and probably 2 years. So I am supportive of that. I actually am in favor of decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana, but not by people who are marketing or selling. It seems to me we have to have a better way of correcting that than putting them in jail. And it has to be a less costly way of addressing those type of issues.
Have you ever smoked marijuana?
Boy, you know something? I've never expected that question, but I'm going to give you an honest answer. When I was in college, yes.
Thank you. What plans do you have to stimulate economic growth in the district?
I think that we have extraordinarily potential here. Let me first go through is I've heard actually from farmers and from private businesses that we need to have the internet. That's if they don't have access, so we have to begin broadband access. The second thing is that somebody sat me down once and proposed that what we do is that I'm not going to be using the correct technical terms for people who are well versed on the internet in this, but what they do now is they offer research incentives that if an individual wants to take on, for instance, the development of a long-term battery that's low cost, easily effective, and they say that if you can prove it will be marketable, you get a very large sum of money. And if you agree that that it can be produced in a certain area, that it can be mass produced and put to market, that is something that goes forward. It seems to me we have a perfect incubation for that. We have abandoned buildings in several different areas. We have ideal areas to set people up to begin these incentives. That's one of the areas that I like to take a look at. And I guess the other one is if you're going to go to some of these villages that are empty, and there are parts of actually Hudson that would be addressed, and there are parts of places like Hoosick Falls, we have to talk about how to get economic development and bring people in instead of having people going out. I'm going to give you the other one, that the mass exodus of seniors out of New York State, not just people, but somebody was giving me a figure the other day, and they're going to be sending me a report, but people over 50 are departing. We have to find a way to keep them here, and one of the things is not the best record of services for senior citizens. And they spend money. They have more money. It helps the economy. And we were just talking earlier about the failure of the IDA incentives. That has to be tightened up. If you're coming here, you better produce the jobs, and we're going to hold you responsible for doing that. And I think you're going to see much better results from those moves as well. And I'll go to the last one. I'm perfectly willing to talk about tax breaks if you can show the benefit and you're willing to be held accountable for those tax breaks, even if with existing companies. I'm going to end with one. Look, there's one other piece that keeps everybody's missing. We don't have the infrastructure that really is going to build something for the future. You cannot have crumbling roads, crumbling bridges, crumbling sewer systems, crumbling water systems, and a lack of internet capacity and say we're economically friendly and ready to go. Somewhere we have to talk about, we need to rebuild this. We need to have a whole scheduled process for rebuilding it, and we're probably going to need to sit down and figure out how to do a public bonding in order to do that. President Eisenhower went out and pushed this very hard against a lot of resistance to build the national highway system. Boom. Way back in history, there was somebody that they used to call it the governor, and they used to call it his ditch. But when they got it done, it was called the Erie Canal, and boom, things happened. You have to invest in it to attract it. And that's something that nobody seems to want to talk about, and we have to get that out on the table and begin working on it.
Now, as a former educator, what do you see as the best way to make college more affordable? I mean, kids are graduating with enormous amounts of debt right now.
Just as an editorial note, as a parent of 2 out of my 3 who are operating under extraordinary debt, and sometimes that helps out, I think there's a couple of things. I don't understand the astronomical increase in cost. That makes little or no sense to me. And so I think that's number one. We have to figure out why the costs are so extraordinary. And number two, I would really like to see, and this is more a federal issue, but I strongly support efforts to reduce the percentage of interest on their loans. That is an extraordinary burden. If they could all be refinanced at today's prices, their bills would be considerably less. But I'm going to go out and I'm going to tell you I don't have every solution, but I'd love to have a commission that would study how do you make higher education affordable in private and public institutions, and then bring back a report recommending legislative changes that can be made, because I think that we have to start putting pressures on these institutions to do things and put students first.
Gotcha. Now, one issue that your opponent has been somewhat active on is the issue of this heroin epidemic, which seems to be getting worse and worse in our area. What do you think needs to be done to curb that?
First of all, I'm going to take exception that she's been active in it. She has sent out flyers. Those flyers basically have to do with, I want to make sure I pronounce this, Naloxone, which is an emergency procedure that, medication if you're overdosing. That certainly, I applaud that. That is a good thing. There's a whole group of assemblymen and senators that are bringing that forward. But here's my question. I've been in education for 40 years. I wish you would have started showing some concern, because we've had drug problems, rather significant ones in schools for some time. And when you address this, you can't isolate just an emergency procedure at the end. You have to take it. I actually have spent time with an individual who is a counselor and a recovered heroin addict. He's been tutoring me about the process, and he says, you have to remember, you have to address how easy it is to access. Second, you have to remember that the young people today are facing stresses and stuff, and they can be led to it. Third, you have to have counseling programs that will help individuals deal with it when they're there. You don't just say, stop it. And the other one that I must admit caught me by surprise, one of the biggest stimulus of this and pushing is the prescription of opiate painkillers. They will be on this prescription for opiate painkillers, and suddenly they're gone. And there are many young people who've been injured, and they're on these things, and then boom, they're gone, and they turn as a substitute because they're hooked. And we have to work with the medical profession about how you prescribe this. We have to somehow get some alert system if they think somebody is becoming an addict. Okay. And you know, there are a couple programs that amazed me that they said were crucial. One actually had to do with drug court, which is a good way of addressing it so that the individuals there get help rather than throw them in jail. They're monitored, and there's a better success for treating them along that line. So there are a whole host of things that we have to address. I will applaud everybody who is addressing that one part. But as a person who's hung around schools for 40 years, I wish they would have taken interest long ago.
Do you support the tax cap?
That's a tough question to answer. You know why? because I understand I pay property taxes. I understand it. On the other hand, I've had to put together budgets and health insurance, fuel, buses, every other supply doesn't stay within that tax cap. So what it is doing is eating more and more into the program. And I wrestled with that, so I guess what I would tell you is that I think that I do not support the tax cap unless we can find an alternative way of financing education. I'm not a fan of the property tax. I don't understand why that is the method for financing education. And somebody says, what's another one? I said, I have to be honest with you. I'd have to become much better acquainted with the entire taxing system before you do that. But there's no way that you cannot go into a negative under the tax cap unless everything else stays at that same rate of increase. And if you're in schools, you've seen it. You've seen it here in Hudson. I've saw it in Troy. I've seen it in every place I've been. The massive number of teachers that are gone, 35,000 in New York State alone.
How big of a role do you think that unfunded mandates from the state play in that?
The superintendent's generated a list of unfunded mandates, and it always seems that the state has a responsibility. And the thing is, we won't increase the cost here. We'll pass it down to the schools so that they have to do it. It can be everything from the physical screening as they're going through to every other type of education. They certainly play a role. And I think if we sit down and take a look at it, and they're actually the New York State Council of School Superintendents, I believe they still have a current list of things that they think would be very helpful. And I have a suspicion that the health services industry has one as well, as do many others. And they will play a role. I couldn't even honestly guess as to what percentage that is. It certainly is part of the picture, but I think it's much broader than that.
Where do you stand on fracking?
I'm opposed to fracking for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, when I read a report that said fracking was safe, the problem is the pipes they're using. I didn't quite understand. You use pipes for fracking. That is part of the process. So, first of all, I don't believe anybody's proved it's safe. The second part is I think that there are too many dangers of having another PCB dump, a Love Canal, or actually there's the Dewey and Stoffel, I believe it is, toxic site that's up in Nassau. There's just too many things that are happening there. And the other part is that sooner or later we're going with climate change, and I'm going to be listening tonight here in Columbia County about climate change. We have to start addressing fossil fuels, and I understand natural gas is better than coal. But when are we going to start looking at a good way to get alternatives that also addresses the climate change? And I would say there's one of the places you do a research incentive. Find ways that we can be independent. And so I'm opposed. And somebody says, don't you want to create jobs? Yes, but not at the expense of 20 years from now, poisoning the environment and costing taxpayers billions of dollars to clean it up.
How can we, in an area like Columbia County, lure more young people into the county? One of the major problems is the population is getting older. People are either leaving or dying. What, as a state senator, would you be able to?
First of all, you don't want to be offensive to those of us who are 65 and up, okay? So we're a wonderful quality people to have here.
No doubt.
Okay. Well, listen, you have to have a stimulating economy. It would be nice if we actually, as we're going through, started to prepare students for some jobs that are in the future. I don't know if you're familiar with the Pathways program in education. Well, Massachusetts actually has it, and you're training people for jobs where the demands are, and it's not college bound. At the end of 5 years, if everything works according to things, they're ready to begin their apprenticeship, and they're well prepared for it. They have a job at the end They have a high school diploma at the end, and some actually have an associate's degree. And I think job-specific training would be one. And the other one is, let's make it attractive for people to come here. In some of those fields, there are buildings to set it up. Go throughout this district. We have abandoned areas that used to be just bustling. Let's rebuild them, and let's invite them in here and say, okay, this is the incentive. You give these jobs, you bring this type of industry, and we want to see you hiring our new and young workers so that we can revitalize it. Those seem to me like they're reasonable conditions to set to give an incentive for people to come here. But you can't discriminate against those of us who are 65. If we wanted to work in those jobs and be trained, you'd have to give us a chance too, all right?
I'm assuming you did Common Core before I got it.
That was the only thing I did.
Is there anything that we haven't brought up that you'd like to talk about?
And I've been waiting for you to ask about campaign finance reform.
Oh, God, yeah. Jesus. And corruption.
Well, listen, responding to your inquiry about campaign finance reform, it goes with this. Look, if you really believe that it's important for each person to have a voice and to be heard and have an influence in Albany, we have to do something about the money that is flowing into Albany. And I'm not going to make that party specific because we can be very honest. There are places in both parties that better get their act together. They're really selling votes. And I think what we would do is it has led to people who, if they make these massive donations, like Mr. Tansky, you can't tell me that when he makes a phone call, or a big donor of any name, of any party makes a phone call, they get the same response as me who did not donate or somebody who could not donate. I don't believe that. There's too much history saying that's not the case. It would seem to me we could do something, and I'm going to give a very radical thing for like a Senate race. You cannot spend, including raising, any other way, more than $100,000 period by PACs or anything else, and require individuals to go out and have candidate forums, and all minor parties would be welcome as well. So they regionally locate it so that everybody has to attend, and you actually have to interact with voters rather than buying attack ads, trying to buy influence, and trying to buy an office. Something is in danger there, and there's some things you can do. Now, I understand if you have a statewide race, that's a little different, and stuff like that. And some of these congressional districts, especially I guess the one up north, are massive. But there ought to be ways of getting back to actually interacting with people and voters. There ought to be ways that we can take it out of having it become this toxic wasteland when you look at it. Here comes this candidate bashing this one. Oh, here comes the opponent bashing him. Here she comes. She's saying something nasty over here. That's not engaging voters. That doesn't tell them what you stand for or who you are or what you want to do.